She carried 3 dying men 30 kilometers through the deadliest valley in Afghanistan, alone. With a bullet fragment in her arm she hadn't mentioned to anyone, and didn't intend to. The dog beside her had been shot too. Neither of them stopped. If you believe real strength never announces itself, subscribe and follow this to the end. The gate of FOB Ironridge had seen a lot of things come through it. Convoys with bullet holes. Helicopters with body bags. Men who walked in looking 10 years older than when they'd left. Sergeant Major Walt Decker had stood near that gate, more times than he could count, and he had learned over 23 years that you could read the entire story of a mission in the first 30 seconds of watching someone come home. He was standing near the motor pool when the radio traffic spiked, confused, overlapping voices from the watchtower, the kind of chatter that happens when someone sees something that doesn't fit any category they were trained for. He turned. He looked. And for the first time in 23 years, Walt Decker did not immediately know what he was looking at. She came through the heat shimmer at the far end of the open ground, like something the valley had decided to give back against its own nature. Decker's eyes registered the details automatically, the way a man registers details when 23 years of hard experience turns observation into a physical reflex. Athletic build, mid-20s, moving with the controlled economy of someone who had been running on empty for a very long time and had decided that stopping was not an available option. Skin tanned deep brown from years under desert sun, not the temporary color of deployment, but the kind that came from growing up somewhere that had 320 days of sunlight a year. Dark brown hair nearly black, matted with blood and dust hanging loose across her shoulders. White athletic tops soaked through and dark with sweat and dried blood. Desert camouflage pants AOR, one pattern navel issue torn at both knees from a fall she had taken sometime in the last several hours. Coyote brown combat boots, coated in the red dust specific to Sarab Valley. Tactical belt, still fully loaded. No unit patch visible. No name tape he could read. 3 men on her, 2 across her shoulders on some kind of improvised frame. He couldn't fully identify from this distance. One strapped across her back, with rigging that looked like it had been reconfigured at least twice. She was carrying all 3 of them, and she was still walking. Beside her left leg, matching her pace, exactly was a German shepherd with a black coat so dark with dried blood it looked almost charcoal. The dog did not pull ahead, did not fall behind, moved with her like a shadow that had learned to breathe. Decker heard the young private, at the gate before he saw him, a kid, barely 3 weeks at Ironridge. Hand-raised weapon coming up, voice cracking on the word halt, with the specific register of someone who had not yet learned the difference between following protocol and understanding the situation in front of him. The dog saw it first. The German shepherd stopped, did not growl, did not lunge, did not bare teeth or make a sound. He simply lowered himself belly to the ground, chin-dropping legs folding beneath him, and held the private with amber eyes that were completely still. Not submissive, not aggressive. Something else, something that occupied a category the private's training had not prepared him for. His hand tightened on the weapon, and then did not tighten further. He held 3 seconds, 4. Enough time for Decker to move through the gathering crowd, put a hand on the private's shoulder, and say quietly, "Stand down. Open the gate." The private stepped aside. The woman walked through without breaking stride, without raising a hand, without acknowledging the exchange that had nearly ended very differently. Decker moved alongside her, matching her pace, reading the 3 men, as she carried them. The tourniquet on the first man's upper thigh, high and tight femoral placement. The chest dressing on the second with the specific pucker of a needle decompression entry point. The pressure bandages on the third, both through and through wounds, forearm and calf bound with a tightness that indicated arterial awareness. Someone had done this work. Someone had done it under conditions he was not yet ready to calculate. She set them down with deliberate sequence, a specific order that distributed weight and protected the unconscious ones from any sudden shift. Only when all three were stable on the ground did she straighten. She was covered in 14 hours of the worst valley in the country. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown, nearly the same color as her hair, and they held an expression he had not seen before on anyone. Not exhaustion, not relief, not the raw unraveling that sometimes came when operators finally crossed the wire. Something quieter than all of those things. Something that had already been through the worst and come out the other side and was now simply present, simply waiting for whatever came next. Staff Sergeant Nate Foley reached them at a run, dropping to his knees beside the first casualty. The dog sat down beside the woman's left leg and rested his chin against her thigh. His gaze moved slowly across the assembled crowd in a long, methodical arc. Decker would think about that look for a long time afterward. It was not the look of an animal. It was the look of a professional. Tucson, Arizona sits in the Sonoran Desert at an elevation of 2,400 feet, ringed by 5 mountain ranges, baked by a sun that treats shade as a suggestion rather than a guarantee. It produces, among other things, people who are comfortable with discomfort, people who learn early that the ground gives nothing easily, and that the heat will take everything you have if you let it. Kira Maddox grew up in a house on the east side of the city, where her father kept his old army boots by the door, even after his knees made wearing them impractical, and her mother came home from 12-hour night shifts at University of Arizona Medical Center and sat at the kitchen table and talked through cases with the careful precision of someone who believed that understanding why things went wrong was the only honest way to prevent them from going wrong again. She was 9 years old, the first time her mother showed her how to apply a pressure dressing on a plastic training arm on the kitchen table. With the same matter-of-fact tone her mother used for everything from explaining trauma response to explaining what to do if a scorpion got into the house. She was 14 when her mother brought home a phlebotomy training kit and taught her to find a vein by feel before she looked. She was 16 when she sat on the living room floor and learned to identify the sound of a tension pneumothorax from a recording her mother had made on her phone in the ER because, her mother said, knowing what a thing sounds like before you encounter it is the difference between pausing and acting. Her father said very little about any of this. He had come back from 2 tours with a quietness that was not damage, or not only damage, but also a specific kind of economy, a habit of measuring words against the weight they needed to carry before releasing them. He taught her to shoot at 12, to navigate terrain at 14, to read a landscape the way a musician reads a score, not note by note, but as a whole system with patterns and intentions and vulnerabilities. She enlisted at 18. She passed the Special Operations Selection Pipeline at 19. No waivers, no modifications, no adjustments to the standard that had been designed for people who did not look like her. She was the youngest operator in her detachment's history, and the only woman who had ever made it through without the pipeline making room for her. The pipeline made no room. She fit anyway. The call sign Shadow came from a night training exercise in her 2nd month with the unit. When a senior NCO spent 20 minutes looking for her in a building, she had been inside the entire time, sitting in a corner with no direct light source. Field stripping her rifle by touch. He said she moved like a shadow that had learned to make decisions. The name stuck, and then it became accurate. And then it became something else entirely, a description not of how she moved, but of where she always positioned herself. Not hidden, just never in direct light. Always at the angle with the best view. She had been deployed continuously for 31 months across 3 theaters when the mission brief for Sarab Valley came through. She read it twice. She noted that the timetable was aggressive but workable. She noted that the terrain profile matched conditions she had operated in before. She noted that the intelligence summary had 3 data points that did not internally contradict each other, but that she would want to verify independently before trusting with her life. She flagged it in her notes and planned to raise it at the pre-mission brief. She did not get the chance. What she did not know, as she packed her kit the night before and ran through her medical inventory with the systematic attention her mother had taught her, was that the route she would follow into that valley had been changed 6 hours earlier by someone she had never met, through a channel she had no reason to monitor, in a way that had been designed specifically so that nobody who mattered would notice until it was too late. She checked every item in her kit twice. She gave Ace his evening meal and watched him eat with the composed attention he gave to everything. She ran through the terrain map in her head one final time. She slept for 4 hours. She did not know that the valley was already waiting for her. She did not know that someone had told it exactly when she was coming. The Sarab Valley had been called the Valley of Death by the units that operated there before Kira had finished high school. And the name was not metaphor. It was geography. It was the specific configuration of high ground on 3 sides, the natural funnel of the valley floor, the way sound moved through the rock at night, in ways that made it nearly impossible to locate a shooter by ear alone. Raider 6 moved in at 02006 operators, 1 medic, 1 K9 asset. The mission was 5 hours soft infiltration, no contact. Lieutenant Harmon led from the front, the way he always did, not from aggression but from the specific temperament of a man who believed that the person making the decisions should occupy the same ground as the people living with the consequences of those decisions. Kira had spoken to him 2 nights before the mission in the way she occasionally spoke to people she was going to follow into dangerous ground, not a long conversation. Not personal in any obvious way, but attentive. He had told her about the billet back home, about his wife, about a son, 8 weeks old, born while he was overseas, whose face he had seen in photographs and not yet in person. His wife had given him a piece of paper before he deployed a lullaby, handwritten at 2 in the morning with the slanted letters of a woman writing one-handed, because the other arm was holding an infant. He carried it in his left chest pocket. He said he was going to sing it to the boy when he got home, even though he couldn't carry a tune. Kira had looked at him for a moment after he said that. She didn't say anything, but she remembered the pocket. At the 3-minute mark inside the valley, Ace stopped. It was not the slow deceleration of a tired animal or the hesitation of an uncertain one. It was absolute 4 feet planted. Body weight shifted back ears, rotating to 2 o'clock with a precision that Kira had learned over 3 years of operating with him, to treat as information rather than behavior. The fur along his spine rose in a single continuous line from his shoulders to his tail. He did not make a sound. Kira registered the signal in less than a second and began to turn toward Harmon. The RPG hit before she completed the turn. The first round was followed immediately by 2 more, from different elevation points, a triangulated kill box, pre-sighted, pre-registered, the kind of setup that required foreknowledge of the exact ground being crossed at the exact time it was being crossed. Harmon was dead before he hit the ground. Kira knew it. She did not look at him for more than 1 second, enough to confirm, not enough to process. Processing was not available. Briggs went down in the same volley, right femur destroyed, femoral artery severed. He fell without a sound, which was somehow worse than screaming. Mace caught shrapnel from a secondary explosion in the chest and left shoulder, crawled behind a boulder before his legs stopped cooperating. Voss, youngest, 24. Operating on the specific unreasonable fuel of a young man who had not yet fully accepted. The concept of his own mortality took rounds through his left forearm and right calf. Stood back up anyway, returned fire until his rifle jammed, threw it at the hillside, and began shouting grid coordinates into a radio that was dead from the first second. Communications had been cut, not degraded, not interrupted, but severed cleanly across all frequencies simultaneously. Kira had heard that kind of silence before. It was not terrain. It was a jammer, pre-positioned, pre-activated, deployed by someone who knew their communications architecture in advance. She registered this the way she registered all critical information, not with alarm, but with the specific cold clarity of a thing that needed to be remembered and acted on later. Right now, there was only the immediate problem. Briggs had 4 minutes. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had calculated it in the 2 seconds since he fell. A minnow of thought, quick and precise. 2 minutes to suppress the second gun position. 30 seconds to reach him, 90 seconds to apply the tourniquet before blood loss crossed the threshold that nothing she carried could reverse. A midsection round sizzled past her left ear as she moved. She felt it as air displacement rather than sound. She put 3 rounds into the upper left firing position and went lateral in a low crawl that kept her below the effective sightline, while repositioning to flank the second machine gun nest from the east. She felt the impact on her right arm before she heard the shot, a fragment small embedding in her upper bicep with a localized burn that told her it had missed bone. She pulled a dressing from her kit, pressed it, wrapped it, single-handed in 10 seconds, secured it with a half-hitch. She had tied so many times it required no conscious attention. Ace appeared at her side. He sniffed her arm once, not affection assessment, and looked at her. She shook her head once small. Definitive. He turned back toward the gully shooter and moved. Ace read her hand. Signals the way a musician reads sheet music, not symbol by symbol, but as a complete language with rhythm and intention, and the kind of trust that only exists between 2 minds that have operated together long enough. Stop needing translation. In 2 hours, they were not a handler and a dog. They were a single unit with 4 legs and 2 brains running in seamless parallel, covering ground that should have required a full team doing the work of suppression and flanking and reconnaissance in the kind of coordinated silence that made the enemy on 3 sides of them unable to determine exactly how many people were working against them. Kira held the second gun position long enough to sprint from cover, reach Briggs, and pull him behind a collapsed section of rock wall. He was conscious, barely. His hands were pressed against his thigh with the instinctive pressure of a man who understood in some animal part of himself that removing them would be the end of things. His face had gone the specific grey-white of significant blood loss. "You're not real," he said. His voice was slow and careful, the voice of a man conserving everything. "Hold this," she said, pressing his hands back to the tourniquet. "Don't let the pressure drop." She had it on and fully tightened in 26 seconds. She counted. She always counted. Ace pinned the gully shooter with the kind of controlled aggression, barking, feinting, repositioning that created genuine uncertainty about whether 1 dog or 6 were working the hillside. It bought her the time to reach Mace in the boulder field. She found him trying to breathe around a chest wound that was pulling air with every inhale, the specific, unmistakable sound of a tension pneumothorax building in real time, air trapped in the pleural space pressure, mounting against the lung minutes from the point of no return. She found the second intercostal space by memory, by feel in the dark, with a machine gun firing 30 meters above her head. The needle went in. Mace gasped, then breathed again. She taped a chest seal over the entry point, flutter valve out, improvised from the needle packaging, not ideal, but sufficient to prevent reaccumulation for the hours ahead. She would check his breathing rate at every stop. "I thought you were a medic," he managed. I am. You just shot 3 people. 4, she said. Stay still. Voss was the most functional of the 3, which was not the same as saying he was fine. Both wounds were through and through with no arterial involvement, and he had enough adrenaline in his system to function well past the point where his body should have stopped cooperating. She bound his forearm tight and told him to apply the same to his calf, which he did without argument, watching her with the expression of a man trying to place something he has no category for. "Who are you?" he said. "Kira." "That's not what I mean." "I know," she said. In the second hour, a round sizzled past the left side of Ace's torso and caught him across the top of his left shoulder. He did not stop, did not vocalize, did not break from the pattern of signals she was running with him. He continued for 40 more minutes, flanking, drawing fire, holding ground, while the wound bled quietly through his black coat, invisible in the dark. When the last of the enemy, fighters withdrew, not routed, not destroyed but made to calculate that the cost of continuing had exceeded whatever the objective was worth. The valley went quiet, not peaceful, quiet the way a thing is quiet after violence, a new silence that has the shape of the old one but doesn't fit the same way. Kira sat down on a flat rock and breathed for 30 seconds. Ace came to her. She reached for him automatically and felt the warm dampness along his left side. She went still. 3 seconds of pure calculation, location depth, estimate arterial risk assessment, immediate action required. She sat down beside him on the ground and opened her kit. Ace held completely still. He did not flinch, did not whine, did not look at the wound. He looked at her steady amber, watching her face the way he always watched her face when she was working, reading her the way she read him. She worked quickly and thoroughly, using the last of her clean dressings. When she finished, she rested her forehead briefly against the top of his head. It was the only moment in 14 hours she allowed herself to feel anything that was not directly in service of the immediate problem. Then she stood up and looked at the 3 living men in her care and began figuring out how to move them 30 kilometers through the most dangerous valley in the country. The solution she built was not elegant. Elegance required resources she did not have. What she had was a broken rifle, stock sections of communications wire webbing stripped from 2 plate carriers, and the specific engineering instinct that comes from growing up in a desert that teaches you very early that the materials you have are the only materials that exist. She built a frame for Briggs and Mace, a modified yoke structure that distributed their combined weight across both shoulders, functional for approximately 8 to 10 minutes of sustained movement before her body began to refuse. She rebuilt Voss's carry harness twice, before it sat at an angle that would not immediately compress her spine. Then she picked them up and started walking. Ace walked beside her left leg. He did not vary his position by more than 6 inches for the entire 30 kilometers. He stopped when she stopped. Moved. When she moved and when she rested 8 times, she counted those too. He turned outward and watched the ground with his eyes moving in slow arcs across the ridgeline, ears rotating at sounds she could not hear, telling her with the angle of his body whether they were threats or nothing. At the 4th rest stop, Briggs tried to talk her out of it. "You can make it out alone," he said. His voice was the careful, paced voice of a man managing significant pain by treating words as a rationed resource. "Get to a radio. Call extraction. Come back for us." "No, that's an order." "You're a petty officer 1st class," she said. "You can't order me to do anything." She checked the tourniquet. The pressure was still good. "You've got about 90 minutes before I need to reassess this. I'll do it at every rest stop. Don't touch it between now and then." He was quiet for a moment. Then more quietly, "Rook hasn't left your side. His name is Ace. He hasn't left you. He never does." She looked at the dog. Ace was watching the ridgeline, with the alert, easy posture of an animal that has made peace with its circumstances and is simply doing its job within them. He glanced at her when he felt her attention, held her gaze for exactly 1 second, and looked back at the ridge. "Especially like this," she said. At the first rest stop, she loosened the tourniquet for 60 seconds. Assessed circulation in the limb, retightened it, and marked the time on Briggs's skin with a grease pencil she kept in her kit. She did the same at every stop after that. At kilometer 18, in complete darkness, the terrain stopped matching the mission map. A flash flood in the previous season had moved a drainage channel and taken the trail behind it. Kira stood at the altered ground and ran calculations in silence. The options were not good. None of them were good. Ace moved in front of her. He looked northeast, a bearing that diverged from their current heading by roughly 15 degrees. Then looked back at her. She studied him. She studied the terrain. She had operated with him for 3 years, had trusted his reading of situations over her own interpretation more than once, and had never found a case where that trust had been misplaced. She let him lead. 800 meters on his bearing, they found an old trail, barely wide enough for a person carrying weight running in the right direction. Foley would explain it later in the flat tone of a man describing a fact that still surprised him: diesel particulate from Ironridge's generators. Carried on the night wind from the northeast, heavy enough to sink low in the cooling air. Ace had smelled the base and known what it meant. At the 6th rest stop, Briggs said in the slow and careful voice, "Harmon asked me the night before the mission. He asked if you'd bring them out if things went wrong." Kira kept her eyes on the tourniquet. "I told him I'd never seen you leave anyone behind." Briggs stopped. Then he nodded. He said, "Good. I needed to know that before we left." Kira finished her check. She stood. Her hand moved to Briggs's chest pocket, the one that held the folded paper she had taken from Harmon's plate carrier before leaving the valley. She rested her hand there for 1 second. Briggs looked down at the pocket, then up at her. He understood. She picked up the weight and started walking again. She did not slow down when FOB Ironridge came into view. She did not raise a hand or call out or give any signal. She simply kept walking, the way she had been walking for 14 hours, with the same measured, exhausted, absolute commitment that had carried 3 men across 30 kilometers of ground that had not wanted them to cross it. The watchtower saw her first. The radio traffic spiked. By the time she reached the gate, the reaction force was assembling, and the crowd was forming, and she could hear the medics before she saw them. She could also hear clearly, and without difficulty, the voice of Captain Ellard. Officer of the day, firm, authoritative. The specific vocal register of a man who has organized his entire professional identity around the external symbols of comment. Hold it right there. Identify yourself. What unit are you with? Where is your commanding officer? She reached the gate and stopped. She began with the same systematic care she had applied to everything for the past 14 hours. To lower Briggs and Mace to the ground. It required her full attention, a specific sequence to prevent either man from being dropped, which meant Captain Ellard's escalating voice occupied the same category as wind noise registered. Noted not currently actionable. Ellard did not appreciate being categorized as wind noise. His voice climbed. "I am talking to you. Look at me. You walk onto this base carrying 3 of our operators. No identification, non-regulation gear, and you can't acknowledge a direct order from an officer." Ace stood. He did not growl, did not bare his teeth, did not make any sound at all. He walked 4 measured steps forward and sat down directly in front of Ellard, and looked up at him with the unhurried attention of an animal that has made up its mind and is in no hurry to share the conclusion. 2 soldiers standing behind Ellard stepped back without appearing to decide to. Kira finished lowering her people. She checked Briggs's tourniquet, checked Mace's chest, checked Voss's dressings. Only when she was satisfied that all three were stable did she push herself to her feet and turn to face the captain. She was 23 years old, 5'6", 143 pounds in full kit, covered in blood and dust, and the bone-deep exhaustion of a thing done past the limit of what the body considers negotiable. And Ellard looked at her and did not see any of that. "A deserter," he said. The word fell into the crowd, like a stone into still water, and the silence that followed had the specific quality of something that cannot be unsaid. That is what I am looking at. A soldier who ran from a firefight and left her unit to die in the field. The crowd went absolutely still. Decker was already moving. Kira's expression did not change. Her eyes held something that was not anger, not contempt, not the reactive heat of someone who had been insulted. It was something older and quieter than those things, the specific expression of a person who has been through the worst available experience and is now simply waiting with absolute patience for the people around them to catch up to what has already happened. Ace sat at her left leg and rested his chin on her thigh. His amber eyes moved slowly, deliberately across the assembled crowd. If Decker had been asked to describe the look on the dog's face, he would have said the word that came to him: unbidden and accurate patience. Decker pushed through to the front. He turned to face the crowd rather than Ellard, a choice that was not accidental. "How many of you?" he said, and his voice, carried without being loud, looked at her walking through that gate and saw what Ellard sees. "You don't have to raise your hand. Just answer it for yourself." Nobody moved. Several people looked at the ground. "That's not because you're bad soldiers," Decker said. "It's because you were trained to read symbols, rank, patch, gender size. Nobody taught you to read evidence." He turned to Ellard then. "Here is the evidence." He pointed to the tourniquet on Briggs's thigh. Foley, already working, looked up and confirmed what Decker described detail by detail, and then stopped and looked at Kira's right arm and removed the field dressing she had applied to herself 14 hours ago in 10 seconds, one-handed under fire. Nobody in the crowd spoke. "She counted," Kira said quietly when Foley looked at her. "I always count." General Raymond Voss stepped out of his vehicle before it had fully stopped, which was the only visible indication that anything unusual had reached him. In every other respect, he was exactly what 23 years of watching him had conditioned Decker to expect: measured, economical. A man who had made so many decisions with irreversible human consequences. That urgency had long since stopped showing on his face. His eyes stopped on the youngest casualty for 3 seconds, long enough for everyone watching to understand, and short enough to tell them what he had decided to do with it. Then he walked directly to her, stepping around Ellard, with the complete absence of acknowledgement one extends to a piece of furniture that happens to be in the way. He stopped 4 feet from Kira and Ace. The dog looked up at him with eyes that registered stars, and rank with the same impartial attention they registered everything else. "Report," Voss said. She gave it to him in 22 seconds. Every necessary fact. No word wasted. The ambush, the grid, the timing, the casualties, the distance, the hours. Her voice was as flat and precise as a coordinate reading. When she finished, a specialist near the back of the crowd said, in the voice of someone who had not yet learned which realizations should stay, internal: 30 kilometers, 14 hours, 3 men. That's not possible. Several of the older soldiers nearby closed their eyes briefly. Voss did not look at the specialist. He kept his eyes on Kira. "You did this alone." "Ace helped," she said. The general looked at the dog. Ace looked back at him with the philosophical patience of an animal that has been in too many difficult situations to be impressed by any particular one. Voss made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite its opposite. Major Lena Park stepped forward with a tablet and read the file at Voss's direction. Call sign, Shadow Actual. Master Sergeant. Unit designation classified. 31 months continuous deployment. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor Device. 3 awards. Purple Heart 4 awards. And then the addendum from Colonel Staves read in Park's clear, careful voice. Maddox operates at a level I have not witnessed in 30 years of service. Her medical instincts are extraordinary. Her tactical instincts are something else, entirely. Something I lack the framework to adequately describe. She does not function like an operator. She functions like a fact of nature. You do not send her to win a fight. You send her when the fight is already over and someone needs to be carried home. Park paused. Continued supplemental note. Maddox declined promotion to warrant officer twice. Reason stated in her written request, I want to stay with Ace. Foley stopped working. He looked at the dog sitting at Kira's left leg shoulder wound, dressed in field expedient bandaging, not a sound of complaint in him through all of it. He said quietly to Decker, she turned down promotion twice to stay with the dog. And the dog got shot and didn't tell anyone. Voss turned to Ellard. When he spoke, his voice was measured and private, carrying only to the people immediately surrounding them, a choice that was itself a form of precision. I taught you at the academy, Voss said. 2nd year. I taught you that an officer observes before he concludes, that he reads evidence, not assumption. Ellard said nothing. She has never taken a class from me, Voss said. She remembers the principle better than you. The silence that followed was its own kind of verdict. You're relieved as officer of the day, effective immediately. 0800. Tomorrow, my aide's office. You will not speak to Master Sergeant Maddox or any of the casualties between now and then. Ellard turned and walked away. Spine, straight stride. Controlled 20 years of conditioning, doing its job, even when the ground was gone from under him. But everyone watching him go could feel the distance between how he looked and how he was, and it was a considerable distance. 3 days after she walked out of Sarab Valley, Kira was at the range at 0530, running controlled pairs at 200 meters with the M14 she had carried through 30 kilometers and never once set down. She had cleaned it the night she arrived, and again the morning after, and every morning since, not because it needed it, but because the routine was an anchor. Something she could do with her hands while her mind worked through the thing she had not yet said in any of the 4 debrief sessions she had been required to sit through. She had heard the ambush before it started. Not the sounds of it, the shape of it. The 30 seconds of silence before the first RPG that was not natural silence, but constructed silence. The held breath stillness of a large number of people in coordinated restraint. She had been turning to tell Harmon when the round came in. She had not told the debrief team. She had been waiting for a specific question that nobody had asked, and the absence of that question told her something important about who was asking and what they already knew. She heard Ellard's footsteps before she saw him quieter than 3 days ago, more deliberate about where he put his feet. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked like a man who had rehearsed several versions of what he was about to say and no longer trusted any of them. What I said at the gate. He stopped. He had been standing at the range for a few minutes before he spoke, and she had let him stand there. I've spent 3 days telling myself I was working with incomplete information, that I made a reasonable judgment call given what I could see. He stopped again. That's not what happened. He looked at the target downrange, rather than at her. I made a complete determination in 30 seconds. I was wrong. I don't understand how that happened, and I need to. Something in Kira's expression shifted, not warmth, but the way a door moves when someone finally pushes it from the correct angle. Your apology is irrelevant to me, she said. But that question isn't. She pressed the last round into the magazine. You saw what you expected to see. You had a framework for what a soldier looks like, and you applied it without examining it. The problem with your framework was that it was built entirely from the outside uniform rank, gender, size. You didn't look at what was actually in front of you. He absorbed that. What was in front of me, he said carefully, was 3 men who were alive because of something I wasn't willing to see. Then he told her what he had found the route change 6 hours before insertion through an encrypted channel signed by an intelligence officer he did not recognize. The original authorization record modified the original version gone. Kira asked him one specific question about the digital signature format in the change order. Ellard went still. I know that format, he said. I saw it in an audit report 8 months ago. I assumed it was a system error. It wasn't a system error, Kira said. She looked at him steadily. Go back to your quarters. Act normal. Eat in the chow hall. Do your job. If anyone asks what you did this morning, you came to the range to get some air. She picked up the M14. Ace, who had been watching Ellard with calm, appraising attention since his arrival, walked 3 steps forward and sat down in front of him. Ellard looked at the dog with the expression of a man who did not know the protocol for this interaction. Hold your hand out, Kira said. Palm down. He did. Ace sniffed his knuckles, considered, and sat back. And Ace approved me, Ellard said, not quite a question. And Ace approved you, she confirmed. She had been building the picture since the first debrief, assembling the pieces the way she assembled everything quietly, without announcing the process. Constructing a structure that would hold weight before she showed it to anyone. The route change was one piece. The jammed communications, a clean cut across all bands, active countermeasure, not terrain, was another. The pre-registered firing positions on ground, that only mattered if you used the changed route, were a third. She had filed 3 reports on similar patterns in the 14 months prior. Not one had been elevated. All 3 had gone through the same intelligence coordination office. She knew the answer. She had known it for 72 hours. She had been waiting for the room where she could say it. The investigation team from Candle Air Base arrived with 4 members in clean uniforms and a man in civilian clothes who sat in the corner of the conference room with a cup of coffee and the carefully managed neutrality of someone who wore that expression professionally. Defense Intelligence Agency. Kira didn't need to see credentials. Colonel Dana Rourke led the session, close-cropped grey hair. The eyes of a woman who had built a career watching what people did when they believed themselves unobserved. When the 4 investigators entered, Ace, lying beside Kira's chair, raised his head and turned it toward the man at the far left of the table. No sound, no stillness, just a specific, sustained attention directed at one person's hands. Only Kira noticed. She began watching what Harrison did not say. She presented her analysis methodically, the frequency signature of the jamming simultaneous cut across all independent bands, at point of initiation, inconsistent with terrain, degradation, consistent with active countermeasure deployed with advanced positional knowledge. The pre-registered firing positions on ground that would have been irrelevant if the original route had been followed. The 3 prior reports all filed through the Intelligence Coordination Office, none elevated. I don't believe the officer who changed the route is your primary source, Kira said. I believe she is your evidence. Someone in that office has been running this for longer than one mission. And when I started filing reports, I became a problem that needed solving. Rourke looked at her. You believe Raider 6 was directed into that valley to eliminate the people who could corroborate what you observed. I believe I was on the target list before the mission was assigned, Kira said. The room was absolutely quiet. At the corner of her vision, Ace had not looked away from Harrison's hands. 3 hours later, while the investigators were transitioning out of the conference room, Kira and Ace were already in the stairwell. They made no sound. They had never needed to. Harrison was at a terminal in the adjacent office, moving with the controlled urgency of a man who has identified a closing window and has decided to go through it. He did not hear them. He transferred the last file to the laptop case, secured the terminal, and moved toward the exterior stairwell. He was 4 steps into the hallway when Kira said stop. He stopped before his conscious mind finished processing the word. Then he turned. What crossed his face was not fear exactly, it was the expression of a man watching the specific outcome. He had spent significant effort trying to arrive anyway. Inevitable and unhurried. "I'm a federal investigator," he said. "You're pointing a weapon at a federal investigator. Put the case on the floor," she said. "Ace." The dog moved forward 4 steps and sat directly in front of the exit, geometric absolute eyes, fixed on Harrison's hands with an attention that had a physical quality like pressure. Harrison looked at the dog. The dog did not blink. He set the case down. She told him what she knew. The terminal access, the candle, manifest, discrepancy. The 14 months of reports that had gone nowhere, the name of the route change signer's certification format that Ellard had recognized. Harrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he said his son was serving in theater, that they had threatened the boy, that he had made a calculation. Harmon had a son, Kira said. 8 weeks old. He didn't come home. Something moved through Harrison's expression at that, not guilt alone, but the specific expression of a person whose arithmetic is failing to hold its shape in the presence of a specific human weight it had not fully accounted for. "You don't understand the scope, don't," she said. The word had the quality of a door closing. "Don't use that language to me. Not today. Not in this building. I carried his teammates out of that valley on my back. I know what the cost of your strategic operation looks like when it's breathing on a stretcher. Boots on the stairs." Rourke came through the stairwell door with 2 security personnel and Agent Cobb and took in the entire scene in the single, instantaneous way of someone with 30 years of field experience. Her eyes went to the case on the floor, to Harrison, to Kira, to Ace, still holding the exit. "Step back, Master Sergeant." Kira stepped back. She lowered the rifle in one smooth motion and put herself against the corridor wall with the practiced economy of someone who knows when her part of the work is done. Ace held his position until Rourke nodded at him. Then he looked at Kira, received a single-hand signal, and moved aside with the composed dignity of a professional who has completed his assignment and knows it. The case contained 14 months of documentation, financial records, communication logs, operational files, systematically removed from official channels, stored in a format designed for extraction. And one unsent email addressed to Harrison's son, written to be found, explaining everything in Harrison's own words, according to Harrison's own reasoning. He had documented his own culpability completely. The original file had been set to transmit automatically to an attorney in Stuttgart if Harrison failed to enter a verification code every 72 hours insurance against the people he was working with. What he had not calculated was that Kira had stopped him with 40 minutes to spare before the next transmission window. He had been trying to cancel the transmission, not complete it. The file on the laptop was a local copy he had been editing when she found him. It was the most thorough self-indictment Cobb had ever seen, and he said so quietly to Rourke in the hallway afterward. Kira sat in a chair outside the conference room for 10 hours, while the contents of the laptop were analyzed and the building was secured, and the machinery of consequence ground through its procedures. Ace's head rested in her lap. Her hand moved without her thinking about it, through the fur behind his left ear, the one place on his body that had no wound. Decker brought coffee twice and food once, and sat beside her for a while without speaking. At some point, Ellard appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked at the situation, read it correctly, and turned and left without asking any of the questions visible in his expression. That was the right thing to do. She noted it. Captain Liu, the base veterinarian, came to examine Ace at Foley's request. Ace sat on the examination table with the complete stillness of an animal that has decided to cooperate, not because it was told to, but because it trusts the person standing at the edge of the table. His amber eyes did not follow Liu's hands. They followed Kira. Through 20 minutes of cleaning and suturing, he looked only at her, reading her face, the way he always read her face. Looking for what she needed, looking for what was wrong, looking for what he could do. Liu said to Foley afterward, "That dog isn't tolerating this because he was trained to endure pain. He's tolerating it because he trusts the person next to the table." Kira held her hand on the top of his head for the entire 20 minutes. When Rourke came out at midnight, her face carrying the deep-seated tiredness of someone who has just finished something large, she sat across from Kira and confirmed the intelligence officer who changed the route had come forward, voluntarily 48 hours earlier. Her family was being secured. She was cooperating fully. The network Harrison had been running was being dismantled. "You gave us the thread," Rourke said. Kira looked down at Ace. She thought about Harmon's son, who would grow up without a father, who had been trying to get home to sing him a lullaby. She had 3 days earlier written a single short message to Harrison's son through a secure channel, telling him what his father had been threatened with, and what his father had done, and that the decision was wrong, and the cost was real, and that he deserved to know the truth so that he could decide for himself what to do with it. Nobody had asked her to do that. Nobody would ever know she had done it. It had simply been the right thing, and she had done it the way she did everything, without announcement, without ceremony, without waiting for the world to arrange itself into a context where it felt sufficiently acknowledged. Voss came out last. He stopped in front of her chair and looked at her and Ace with the expression she had come to recognize as the one he reserved specifically for her, the older one, the less controlled one, the one that was not any of his 3 standard settings. "You should have been included in this investigation from the day you filed your first report," he said. "I want you to know that I understand that, and that the failure to include you contributed directly to what happened in the valley." "Yes," she said, "it did." He did not flinch from it. She respected that. He told her the intelligence coordination structure at the regional level would be reviewed and that she would be asked to provide testimony, and that all 3 of her prior reports were being reopened, and that she would have access to the original mission files. "After that," he said, "what do you need?" She thought about it. She thought about Briggs in the surgical ward 3 days from an operation on a femur, that the surgeon said he had a strong chance of walking on again without a limp. She thought about Mace's handwritten note, 4 lines in handwriting so bad she'd had to read it 3 times, saying only you hit a nerve decompression in the dark with one hand while shooting with the other. And there is no word for thank you that covers what that means, so I am just going to say it anyway, thank you. She thought about Voss arguing with his physical therapist about return-to-duty timelines with the specific, unreasonable optimism of a 24-year-old who has survived something that should have killed him. She thought about Harmon last. The way you save the weight you can least afford to set down until you are closer to finding somewhere safe to put it. 2 weeks, she said, for Ace. Somewhere he can run. Voss looked at the sleeping dog. Done. What else? After the 2 weeks, she said, I need to go back to work. Decker found her there an hour later in the same chair, Ace at her side. Both of them quiet and watchful, in the particular way of creatures that are never fully off duty, that carry the work not as a burden but as a nature, as the unchangeable fact of what they are. He sat down next to her. After a while he said, In 23 years, Master Sergeant. He stopped, started again. I have never seen anything like it. Not once. She looked at him. She did not deflect it or minimize it the way she deflected most things. She let it land. She let it mean what he meant it to mean. Because he had earned the right to mean it, and because some things offered in genuine honesty by a good person deserved to be received the same way. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said. He nodded. He put a hand briefly on the top of Ace's head, which the dog accepted with dignified tolerance and the faint suggestion of approval. Then he walked away down the corridor back toward the work that was always waiting. Ace stirred in her lap. He lifted his head, looked at her, and she watched his eyes move from the softness of sleep into their usual precision, reading her, assessing, looking for what she needed. She scratched behind his left ear. He leaned into it. "We're okay," she told him. "It's done." He looked at her for one more second. Then he stood, stretched, with the full body, unself-conscious commitment that only dogs achieve, and sat back down beside her left leg. His amber eyes moved to the corridor. His ears turned to the sounds of the building. He began quietly, and without ceremony, the business of watching the perimeter. He was back at work. She would be too. That was who they were. That was what they did. They did it because they were built for it, because the work was real, because somewhere in the space between what was asked and what they gave, there was an answer to a question that most people never thought to ask about themselves. Outside past the wire, the Sarab Valley sat in the dark the way it always sat, patient, indifferent, unchanged, the valley that had given back what it took for once for one night, because she had refused to let it keep what belonged to her. Kira Maddox and Ace sat together in the quiet hallway of FOB Ironridge, and they were ready and they were enough, and that had always been exactly true. If this story moved, you hit subscribe and drop a like so more people find it. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest, and let me know what city or country you are reading this from right now.